I can do the introduction for Richard because he's.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Richard's having some difficulty with the video feed. So while he's probably got some specific things that he wanted to say that I don't have in front of me, I just want to say thanks very much for DrayTek and Island Australia for putting on today's session, and thanks everybody for attending. These sessions are of great value to us all, and we usually get quite a lot out of it. I know that from our previous sessions, we got some really good feedback, and we're hoping that everybody gets a lot out of today's session as well. So I think we'll probably at some stage cut back to Richard once he's got his technical issues sorted out, because there were some specific things in there, but just for now I think we'll just kick it off, and thanks everybody for coming along.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you, Byron. So a warm welcome to our online training course. Starting with a brief about me, my name is Java, and I'm an IT sales specialist here at Island Technology. I hope everyone can hear me all right. Just drop a quick thumbs up in the chat, or just say hello if you're able to see the chat. It should be on the right of the Microsoft app. So I've been in IT and business development for over 17 years now, and have been associated with DrayTek for close to 5. I'm guessing a few of you would have interacted with me via email, chat, or perhaps a quick phone call. Or you might have seen me on the DrayTek webinars on our YouTube channel. So this online training course is meant to allow our partners there in New Zealand to gain knowledge of the features and the config options available in DrayTek routers. The course today is going to consist of some background theory and videos, but there's also going to be some hands-on demonstration of the practical exercises, so keep an eye on for that. The purpose, of course, is to equip all of you with the information you need to be more productive in your workplace. Do remember to stick around at the end and fill out our survey to qualify for 105 New Zealand dollars off of the reseller price for one of the new AX models. That would be the Vigor 2866AX, the 65AX, the 2765AX, the 2927AX, or the 2135AX. That is going to be valid till the 15th of May. So guess we've lost a bit of time, but I'm going to quickly introduce our team today. I'm going to pass you on to Edward, Harvey, Samuel, Roy, and Darren. We're going to quickly tell you a little bit about themselves before we resume the session. So over to you guys. Hopefully Microsoft gods play nice.
Okay, I'm Edward. I work at. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm Edward. I work at Alan for 7 years now, and maybe you already met me through our ticketing system. So assisting you on technical inquiries and also help you how to assist, like do requirements assessment on the DrayTek product line. Okay, I'm gonna pass you to Harvey.
Yes, thank you. My name is Harvey. I've been with Island for nearly 6 years now. I deal with the help desk and training also. And today I will give you a short demo on how to collect Syslog on DrayTek routers. Pass you on to Samuel.
Thank you, Harvey. Can you hear me? All right. So my name is Samuel. I work in DrayTek Island, Australia for nearly 1.5 years now. And I'm a technical support here, mostly responding to the tickets. And sometimes I create application notes and webinar topics. So today I will demonstrate one of the hands-on demo video on the first half of the online workshop. So now I'll pass it to our technical manager, Roy.
Unmute yourself, Roy, remember.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. My name is Roy Panetta. I'm the technical manager at Island Technologies. And I've been in the company for about 15 years now. And I mainly look after the day-to-day running of the support services. And I'm involved in producing the training material that you're going to use today. So I hope you get the most out of it, and we'll pass you to Darren in Queensland.
Unmute, come on. Morning, everyone. I'm Darren. I'll be taking over from part 2 today. So that'll be about an hour's time or so. Yeah, up here in sunny Queensland, if you're ever up this way, feel free to drop in and say hello. All right, anyone else, or back to Jawa?
I think I'll take over, mate. Thank you.
Too easy.
All right, so that was the team. Before we begin, I'm going to quickly go over some housekeeping items. Please do ensure that the microphones stay muted during the session. And if you do wish to make a comment, it's best you raise your hand and we'll allow you to speak. You can also type those questions in the chat box. I see there's a few people who are already engaged there, so please use the chat box during the session. And do remember that the session is going to be recorded. And if you do not wish to be viewed in the same, you can simply switch off your camera. So we are going to be using Microsoft Teams, and in case you may not be familiar with the application or maybe having some issues, I see there's a few people who are unable to log in or maybe having issues with sound. The next few slides are going to be helpful. So up top your window, there's a bunch of icons, and depending on the size, the middle somewhere, you'll see the 3 dots. Just click on that to see all the available options. The main one's the device setting. And we are using the latest version of the Teams app. There's also a web browser edition where the toolbar is going to appear if you mouse over the window. So if you click on that, you'll see your speaker, the mic, and the audio options if you're having issues with any of those. So hopefully David and Richard, if you can't hear or see us, this would be where you see and try to get this sorted. So right up top, you'll see icons for the camera and mic. If you want to turn the camera off or to mute yourself, just click on those. Hopefully they're muted already, because Edward's got the big switch that mutes everyone. If you are invited to speak, don't forget to unmute your mic. The list of participants can be viewed if you click on this. And the next one's the chat icon. Please click on that, open up the chat window, and participate in the session. Our team is viewing and responding to comments there. So if you want to attach any files or add any emojis or GIFs and stickers, you can do that as well. The third one is where you can raise your hand if you want to ask a question or if you want to contribute to the session. What's that? Okay, that's good. Nice. All right. I see Richard's back on. We'll let you have a quick word towards the middle or maybe the end of the session. We're on a roll, so let it flow, I guess.
Yeah, do it.
Perfect.
Sorry guys, I'm late. I had some technical difficulties. I had to ask if there are any network engineers in the building.
Glad you found some, Richard. All right, moving on. So here's the schedule we're going to be following today. The part 1 is going to be handled by yours truly. Part 1 and 2 are going to run for about 45 minutes apiece. There is going to be a 15-minute general discussion in the end, and we will have a 5-minute break between session 1 and 2. Okay, get into the thick of things now. The part 1 is going to be about some background information, which I'm sure most of you would be well aware of. We're going to be talking about basic things like the Web GUI of DrayTek routers, followed by the system maintenance menu options and the different ways available to upgrade the router firmware. Okay, it's time to begin. Let's start by looking at the Web GUI in DrayTek routers. There are many management functions that are available here. So before we start, I'd just like to mention that the factory default settings tend to vary by model type. For instance, most routers will have a default LAN IP of 192.168.1.1, while your access points will have the LAN IP of 192.168.1.2. and the switches have the default IP of 1.224. But this depends on the model, so it's recommended you check the quick start guide. The default username and password is admin and admin. And to access the router's GUI, you simply connect your PC to one of the LAN ports as shown in the diagram. And using your browser, connect to 192.168.1.1 IP address, and you should see the login menu. So another way to configure the router is using the command line interface. You may need to do this for diagnostic purposes, or if you want to configure settings which are not available through the web interface. Again, two methods to access it. First is via Telnet, and second is via GUI. When using Telnet on the PC, simply connect the router's LAN port and ensure that the DHCP client is enabled. Otherwise, you can always enter a static IP address. Then from your command prompt, you run the command telnet 192.168.1.1 or whatever the LAN IP address is of the router. And once you're in, log in with the admin username and password, which is admin if it's in factory default. So when you are in the router CLI, the question mark can be used to check for available commands, hints, and the current settings. The first layer is when you enter the question mark command, it gives you a list of available commands. Layer 2 is when you enter a command with a question mark, that'll display all the valid subcommands available for that command. And next, when you enter the full command, that is command with a subcommand followed by a question mark, it'll display the current setting. And to change it, you just need to enter the command with a parameter after it. The second method to use is the shortcut in the router's web interface. Just click on the web console shortcut at the top of the page. It'll take you to the router's CLI. And this gets very handy if you have a Telnet client on your PC. You just need to log in with the router's admin username and password. The first thing that you notice when you log into your router is the dashboard page. DrayTek have designed their dashboard to look more interactive and user-friendly. With the visual display of the router on the page, you can not only know about the used and the unused ports, but by clicking on any port, it'll direct you to the respective configuration page. There are options like system information, IPv4 LAN information, the internet access, interface, security, system resources, and so forth, which make it easy for admins to go through the settings under one page instead of checking them through multiple options. The dashboard can also be customized to only display the items you're interested in. At the top of the web page, you'll notice there are several useful icons, which are shortcuts to the different functions. You see the home, the GUI map, the web console, the config backup, user manual, and logout icons. Let's quickly talk about these now. So click on the home page. It'll take you straight to the DrayTek website. It's a very quick way to access information and get application notes or firmware downloads from the DrayTek.com homepage. Next one there is the GUI map, which is a helpful option, especially when you don't know where to find other configuration menus. Just click on any of those options and it'll direct you to the respective config page. The web console, which I mentioned earlier, takes you directly to the command line interface of your router. It allows you to establish a Telnet session with the router without a need to have a Telnet software installed on the PC. This is often used for diagnostics or to configure parameters that are not available in the web menu. Next one's the config backup. It'll prompt you where you want to save your configuration file, which by default is the local drive on your PC. It's a quick method rather than navigating to the system maintenance menu and going to the backup option available there. So as I mentioned, another way to back up the router's configuration is from the config backup menu, which is available under system maintenance. This can be done in two ways, which are backup and auto backup to USB storage. The difference between that is with the auto backup to USB storage, you can schedule backup periodically or after any changes have been done to the configuration. Next one's the user manual icon, which takes you to DrayTek.com website and allows you to download the user guide for the router. And finally is the logout icon, which will log you out from the router and take you back to the initial login page. So if you ever need a quick reminder about these icons, where they are and what they do, there is a short video that was produced a few years ago on our YouTube. It's called the 6 Hidden Features in DrayTek Vigor Routers. These features obviously aren't really hidden, but they're sort of easy to miss if you don't know that they're there. So moving on to the system maintenance menu, where you can find several management functions. So here are the menu options available under the system maintenance menu in a Vigor 2865 router. Most of these will be available in other DrayOS routers too. Access points and switches have some of these options available as well. Let's go over each of these now. So right up top, we have the system status. This page will provide information such as the router model, the firmware version, and the build date. You also get a summary of the LAN and the WAN details. Next on the list is TR069. This is used to set up the router to be managed by the VigorACS 2 or ACS 3. I'll be talking about these solutions later. In access points and Vigor switches, the setting can also be used with VigorConnect, which is a free software to manage those devices. NetFlow is a new option that's been added in firmware versions 4.4.0 and above in the 2865 router series. It'll not be available in older routers or if you're running older firmwares. It basically provides the ability to collect IP network traffic as it enters or exits your WAN interface. By analyzing the data provided by NetFlow, an administrator can determine things such as the source and the destination of traffic and the class of service. Next on the list, we have the administrator password settings, where you can change the admin password and also select a more secure method to log into the router by using either a one-time password or two-factor authentication. A user in the local user database can also be assigned an administrator role. Secure login methods can be selected here. And in addition to the admin password, we have the option for a user password. This is where you want someone to monitor the router and only be permitted to make basic configuration changes. In the login page greeting menu, you create custom login pages where when you log into the router, you can have your company name displayed like the one you see on your screen. We've got Island Technology on the page. And at the bottom, we have a custom welcome message as well. There is option to upload your own file for the login page too. All right, so next is the configuration backup option. It allows you to backup and restore saved configuration files to the router. I'm getting a bit of an echo. It would just make sure everyone's muted. Thank you. So we don't stress this enough, but it is recommended to regularly save a copy of your router's configuration in case it has become damaged. There is an option to have automated regular backups by saving the backups to an attached USB flash drive. Very handy feature if you forget the admin password of your router. is to restore the router's configuration without the admin password. In order for this to work, a backed up configuration file must come from the same router, and you'll need to reset the router to factory default so that you can access the login page using the default admin credentials. It is worth noting that some router menu option settings can also be backed up within the menu. Things like static route setup, port redirection, open port setup, firewall, object settings, as well as VPN profiles. So, of course, why bother making a configuration backup? I'll give you 3 reasons why you should do it. Firstly, if something goes wrong with the router, you can always restore a known working version to get the device working again. Next, you can copy it to another device if you need to. And the third is that DrayTek support is often going to ask for a copy of the config file to check the settings that have been used and to try to replicate the issue that have been reported so we can find a solution. And if you are upgrading from an older router to the latest model, you can migrate the configuration settings as long as the routers are of a similar type or basically of the same family. For instance, with the 2865 or the new 2866 routers, you can import the config files from the old 2860s or the 62s, provided they have the firmware versions listed down there at the bottom of that menu. All right, let's see if you've been paying attention. Why do we need a configuration backup? Is it A, to restore the working configuration if the device gets configured, if the configuration changes? Or is it B, to copy the config to another device? Is it C, for the support team to reproduce the issues? Is it D, all of the above? Or is it E, config backup not needed? Please use the chat box to write your answers. Here's looking at Jordan comes in with a D, so does Aaron, Stephen. Yeah, I think this one was a bit easy. Well done, Neil, Stephen. All right, the answer is, of course, D, all of the above, A, B, and C. Well done, guys. All right, so talking about webhook now, this one's actually a new feature that's been recently added. It allows the Vigor router to send periodical reports, which are basically webhook messages to a monitoring server. Information sent includes the router model, the MAC address, the uptime, memory, and the CPU usage, and the WAN status. Here's a sample of the type of output you can see through the webhook. In the router, it's just a matter of enabling the function and specifying the server URL to receive these reports. When issues are encountered in your router, it is often necessary to capture the syslog for troubleshooting. Syslogs can be sent to external syslog servers or to an attached USB flash drive. You can also select the types of syslogs to capture, and these can be viewed in the Diagnostics Syslog Explorer menu, but the number of syslogs is limited. And you do have an option to save the syslog to attached USB disk, similar to the system maintenance menu. I'll be going through syslog analysis a little later. It is very important to keep the correct time and date setting in your router. It is required for setting up scheduled tasks in the router, such as your internet access time slots, firewall settings to apply at allocated times, and enabling Wi-Fi access for users. Syslogs also include timestamps, so it helps to have the correct time when analyzing the logs. Certificate generation also requires a correct time and date, otherwise it'll not work. And even the WAN budget settings require the correct time and date, so it will match your monthly internet data plan. There is an option here to use your PC browser time, but a more reliable method is to use NTP, which will point to a time server and update on a regular basis. You will need to ensure that the correct time zone selected, or you're going to see unexpected results for scheduled tasks. SNMP, an easy way to monitor router uptime as well as other various parameters. SNMP agents version 1, 2, and 3 are supported in the router latest firmware available for Vigor routers. Free SNMP server software such as PRTG can be used to monitor the router. You'll need to enable the SNMP service in the System Maintenance Management menu. So here's a diagram that illustrates the principle of SNMP communication. The agent, which will be the DrayTek router, is going to send traps to the SNMP management station whenever an event occurs. We also have get and set requests. So DrayTek Vigor routers support MIB2 and ADSL line MIBS. DrayTek have provided a list of OIDs that are supported in the latest firmware and covers several categories that are listed on your screen. The list is available in the knowledge base article 5517 that Roy's just posted in the chat. The OID is in numerical dot format. You can see an example shown is 1.3.6.1.2.1.1.1, which is for sys description, and this has to be entered in the network management station so that it can poll the router to retrieve the data. So just refer to the knowledge base that's been posted in chat now. Okay, the management menu page. This is where you control access to the router from both the internet as well as the local network. You can give a name to the router and disable the auto logout function. Enabling the validation code will provide you an extra level of security from hackers who are trying to gain access to the router. If internet access is enabled, it is recommended to create an access list to only permit access from known source. More secure method to access the router remotely would be to disable internet access and provide access via a VPN connection. You can also customize management ports, and brute force protection will block multiple attempts at trying to log into the router. The LAN access setup can also be customized to allow access to the router only from certain LANs. The new addition in later firmware version is panel control. This will allow you to customize the functions and the appearance of the front panel. We can control LED indicators, the push buttons, the USB port, and even the LAN access ports. Here you can see the LED control where we can switch off all LEDs. We've got customers who don't want flashing LEDs in their environment, so this is going to help them. Here we've shown the 3 other panel options. The button control will allow you to disable the wireless and the factory reset buttons. Disabling the wireless button will prevent the Wi-Fi from being disabled if the button is accidentally pressed. Disabling the USB port will prevent people from using that port. And similarly, LAN ports can be disabled to prevent unauthorized users from connecting their device into an unused LAN port of the router. A self-signed certificate is basically a unique identification for the device, which could be a Vigor router. It generates the certificate by itself to ensure the router security. And such a self-signed certificate is signed with its own private key. The self-signed certificate can be used for services like SSL VPN and HTTPS. In addition, it can be created for free by using a wide variety of tools. Just click on Regenerate to recreate the certificate, and you should note that the time and the date, including the time zone, must be correctly set up in order for this function to work. Next is the Reboot System menu option, which will allow you to restart the router. It can be restarted to use the current configuration, or if you want to reset to factory defaults. Do remember that if you're restarting the router remotely using factory defaults, it's going to mean a trip to the remote site to reconfigure the router. The router can be set to restart on regular basis as well as per anytime schedules. This may be necessary if some issues are encountered that require a regular reboot. Okay, the next one's the firmware upgrade menu, which will allow you to install the latest firmware version. Just click on the check latest firmware button. It'll check the DrayTek website for a later version if it's available for download. You can also install older firmwares if you wish to go back to a previous version. It is, however, recommended to first make a backup of the router's configuration before you proceed with the firmware update, since if there is a big gap in the version numbers, the existing configuration may not fully migrate, especially if new features have been added to the latest version. Another quick point to note is that when you download the firmware file, it's a zip file which contains two files. There is a .all and a .rst file. The .all file will retain the current configuration of your router, and the .rst will reset the device to factory default settings. This is sometimes necessary to do when the configurations become corrupted and the router is not working as expected. There are, of course, other methods that can be used to upgrade the firmware, and I will talk about this shortly. But before that, how about another quick quiz? So we just spoke about this. Which firmware file will reset the router to factory default settings? Is it A, the file with .all extension? Wow, Neil, Jordan, that was quick. Is it B, the file with .rst, or file C with .cfg? All right, I see this one's easy too. The answer is, of course, B. The file with .rst extension is going to do a factory reset. The CFG file, which was a bit of a curveball in the options, is actually not a firmware file extension. It is the extension for your router's backup configuration. Okay. So firmware backup's a new feature that's been added to later model routers, and this is used by the router to restore the functionality should the running firmware become corrupted and has caused the router to crash. After the third crash, the router will automatically reinstall the backed up firmware. And there are three methods that can be used to create a backup. These are after a router reboot, after a specified period of time, and finally is the manual option. Okay, second last option is the internal service user list, which allows you to enable or disable radius and local 802.1x settings for users created in the user management section of the router. And finally, the last item in the system maintenance is the dashboard control, which lets you select which items you need to display in the dashboard of the router and basically customize it. And with all the dashboard controls enabled, you're going to see a dashboard which looks similar to the one on your screen. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, in addition to the option in the system maintenance to upgrade the firmware, there are several other methods that can be used. Well, you may ask, why do I need to upgrade the router's firmware? Well, there are three reasons again. First is to get all the new features, to get the latest bug fixes, and all firmware development is based on the latest version. In order to check which version is currently installed on the router, just go to the dashboard page and it'll be shown in the system information section. There are various methods available to upgrade your router firmware. These are using the Web GUI option in the system maintenance menu. We have the firmware upgrade utility from DrayTek, FTP for remote firmware installation, and there's the forced TFTP method for routers that become unresponsive. And finally, there's the VigorACS 2 central management system. With VigorACS 2 and 3, these upgrades can be scheduled to be done automatically after hours. There is an application note that's on your screen and in the chat box, which goes over all of these methods. For each of these methods, it is recommended to first make a backup of the router config before you upgrade the firmware. It's not going to be possible for method 4, where your router is unresponsive, but here's hoping you have a previous backup you can use to restore the router. And as mentioned earlier, the firmware files are available in two versions, the .all and .rst. It is recommended not to use the .rst file for remote firmware installations, as it's going to mean a trip for you to a remote site to reconfigure the router, since it'll go back to factory default configuration settings and lose all of it. I'm going to be briefly going over each of these methods now. So the Web GUI method, we covered this earlier, so I'm not going to go into details here. The second method that you can use is the firmware upgrade utility that can be downloaded from our website downloads page. You can use the method when the Web GUI method doesn't work well. You'll need to enter the router IP address and the firmware file to transfer. So Roy's linked the downloads page in the chat. Please refer to that. And once you've got the software, all you got to do is enter the router's IP address where the firmware file will be transferred. You enter the admin password and click on send to start the file transfer. And when you're carrying out any firmware updates from your PC, regardless of the method that you're using, you'll need to ensure that the PC's firewall is disabled during the operations, because the file transfer can get interrupted, which will cause the router to have a damaged firmware. The next method we look at is using FTP to upgrade the router firmware remotely. As noted, the method's not available for later model routers, and instructions for using the method is covered in the knowledge base article that's on your screen and in the chat box. The first step is to ensure that FTP is allowed from the internet and FTP port is available. This is configured in the system maintenance menu as shown here. So Stephen asks, is there a reason why the previous button doesn't find the latest firmware? Do we know, Edward? Well, I believe routers like the 2865, the 2860. Is there an echo?
Yeah, it's.
Okay, that's all right. Anyway, so 2865s, the 66s, the 167s, there's a few different firmwares that are available. So it is recommended you go on the downloads page and get the version which is highlighted, because it works 9 times out of 10.
Yeah, by the way, the latest firmware, the router goes to the DrayTek.com website to find it. And sometimes the version is damaged, so I can always get back to you. That's only That's the only reason I can see.
Instead of looking at the DrayTek.com website for the firmware, it's best you refer to the downloads page. That's on draytek.com.au, where the firmwares are more suited to this part of the world.
I mean, the router finds it by itself on the DrayTek.com website.
Right. All right. So, talking about the FTP method, next step would be to use an FTP client in your PC to send the firmware file to the router. Once done, you just close the FTP client and the router is going to reboot and install the new firmware. Do note that using the firmware file with the .rst will reset the router to factory default, and you'll most likely lose contact with the device until it is reconfigured. So the next one is where we use TFTP mode to install the firmware when the router becomes unresponsive. For instance, in the image shown here, you can see that all of the LEDs are solid, and powering the router off and on is not going to fix it. This often gets caused by damaged firmware or if a corrupted router configuration. We've got a video on our YouTube channel that shows you the process to recover the router using the method there. Roy's posted that one in the chat. And also there's an application note available in our knowledge base article that Roy's pasted in the chat now. Okay, so quickly going over the steps that I used. First, you switch off the router. Then, using a pointed object, you press and hold the reset button on the rear or in the front of some routers. Whilst you're holding the reset button, switch on the power to the router and wait until the two LEDs start flashing together, and then you release the reset button. The router will remain in this mode for a short period, and then using the firmware upgrade utility, you install the firmware. If you're maintaining a large number of routers, it can be very time consuming to upgrade the firmware on each router individually. So it's recommended that you look at the VigorACS 3 solution, which will allow you to manage a large number of DrayTek devices from a central console and automate your firmware updates. Firmware upgrades through the VigorACS solution can be scheduled to be carried out after hours, and also multiple routers can be upgraded at the same time by creating a list of devices. When the VigorACS server receives information from CPE devices, it checks the firmware version, and it will update the firmware if it is older than the one that's specified in the upgrade list. There is a 30-day trial available of the VigorACS. Please get in touch with support, and we'll happily organize a trial of the VigorACS solution for you. Okay, so time for another quiz question. Let's see if this one's going to stump you. Which firmware installation method should you use if the router is bricked? Is it the Web GUI? Is it B, the firmware upgrade utility? Is it C, the FTP method? Or is it D, the forced TFTP? Or E, VigorACS2? A bunch of D, yes, that's right. I see everyone got that right. When the router is unresponsive, it is usually caused by a damaged firmware or corrupted router configuration, and the other methods that we've listed here are not going to work. Well done. So, time now for a hands-on demonstration of what we've just covered. Samuel is going to go through the different ways to upgrade the firmware in a Vigor 2927 router. Detailed instructions are available on the workshop manual if you want to follow along. So over to you, Samuel. Is hoping for a smooth demonstration.
All right. Thank you, Java. Thank you. So in the next 5 minutes, I will show you different ways to upgrade the firmware in the 2927. And I have pre-recorded the video, so hopefully everything goes well. Can you guys see my screen now? It's coming. It's okay. All right. Okay, let's start. Nice. Method to upgrade is through the router web management page. Go to System Maintenance, Firmware Update menu, click on Choose File button, and select the firmware file from your PC. Click on Upgrade button to start the firmware installation. Once the firmware file has been uploaded, click on Restart to apply the settings and reboot. The second method is using the firmware upgrade tool. This software can be downloaded from our download page under Utility. Start the upgrade utility and you will see this message. Click OK to disable the firewall to avoid corrupted firmware upgrade. Enter the router IP address. Select the firmware file. Enter the router admin password. Leave port and timeout at default setting. Open the command prompt and make sure the PC can ping to the router. Then click Send to start. A pop-up message will appear at the end, showing the router is now active. Now comes to the third method, upgrading the firmware using FTP client. We need to first set up the FTP server in the DrayTek router. Go to System Maintenance, Management menu, select Allow Management from the Internet and the FTP server, and check the FTP port. Note that this method will only work with older router, and this feature has been removed from the later model routers. In this video, we will demonstrate using the Vigor 2820 router, which was discontinued some time ago. Now start the FTP client. In this example, here we are using FileZilla. Enter the router WAN IP address, username and password, and the FTP port 21. Click Quick Connect and OK to proceed. Now drag and drop the firmware file to the router. During the firmware upgrade, the web page of the router shows upgrading the firmware. Once the firmware is transferred, terminate the FTP connection and close the FTP client. The router should perform a reboot and upgrade the firmware itself. If the router did not reboot, go to System Maintenance, Reboot System, and click Reboot Now. The fourth method is upgrading the router using forced TFTP mode. We also recommend clients to reflush the firmware using this method when there is a corrupted firmware. To get into the forced TFTP mode, first turn off the router, then use a pin to press and hold the reset button on the front panel of the router. While you are holding the reset button, power on the router. Wait until the LED light starts flashing, then release the reset button. Note that the flashing pattern may vary on different models. Start the upgrade utility, enter the router IP address, select the firmware file, Enter the router admin password. Leave port and time at default settings. Open the command prompt and make sure the PC can ping to the router. Then click Send to start. Once the upgrade is complete, go to Dashboard page and verify. The fifth method is upgrading the firmware via ACS3. Before upgrading the firmware on the management devices, we need to first upload the firmware files to the ACS3 server. To do this, go to the File Manager within the Maintenance page. We will need to have the required user group selected. In our sample here, we select the SD-WAN user group. Now click on Upload. Select the firmware file from your PC. We have uploaded the Figure 2927 firmware here. Now go to the firmware upgrade menu. Check that the correct user group is selected. Then click on the Add icon, enter a name for the profile, and select Enable. You can run the upgrade immediately by selecting now or later by using the schedule. For the schedule setup, enter the start and end times as well as the date. Next, select the required firmware. Then select the device to upgrade, which is the Vigor 2927 router. Click Save to save the profile and initiate the task. Alright, this is the end of the video. If you want to revisit the video, it is available in our YouTube channel as well. So thank you for watching. Now I'll pass it back to Java.
Thanks, mate. So for anyone who saw, obviously getting the VigorACS makes your life super easy. It can be trialed for 30 days. I would recommend you get in touch with the SnapperNet support and ask for a trial of the VigorACS solution. So to quickly summarize what we've done so far, we started by looking at some background information in our Getting Started section. Here we spoke about how to log into a router and some of the Web GUI features. Next, we looked at the system maintenance menu, where we worked through some of the configuration menu options and how to use them. And finally, we looked at the different ways to upgrade the firmware in the router, which was followed by a hands-on demo to show you what is involved. So 45 minutes is done. Not bad. Time for a quick break, I think. Let's come back in 5 minutes when Darren is going to continue with the second part of the workshop. So please go ahead, grab yourselves a coffee. And during the break, if you have a question, please type them in the chat box and we'll respond to you there.
Thanks, Joa.
Thanks, no worries. Thanks, Joa. I'll play a little video while we're all grabbing a cup of coffee. Might be a sec. Excuse the lag on this. It's just a Teams thing. Not much we can do about it. Hi everyone, Darren from DrayTek Australia and New Zealand, and I'd like to introduce you to our latest series of routers, the Vigor 2866 series. Now, the 2866 series is not a replacement for the 2865 series, even though the models and features are almost exactly the same. The main difference is that the 2866 series also supports G-Fast, which is a newer and faster type of DSL technology like ADSL, VDSL, and VDSL2. Let's take a look. First up, we have the Vigor 2866. This one has no Wi-Fi, but has all of the other features, including a DSL WAN port, which can be connected to G-Fast, VDSL, VDSL2, or even ADSL. A switchable gigabit Ethernet WAN port, which can be connected to any type of internet connection requiring one of those. If you don't need it for an internet connection, it can alternatively be configured as an extra LAN port.
5 gigabit Ethernet LAN ports to connect PCs and other devices, and 2 USB ports which can be connected to a 3G or 4G USB modem or a USB flash drive or hard drive for sharing files on a network or collecting Syslogs, or you can connect a USB printer to make it accessible on a network, or even a USB thermometer to monitor environmental temperature and receive email or text alerts if it gets too hot or cold. If we compare it to the Vigor2865, we can see it looks identical. Inside, we have support for up to 32 VPNs, which can be either LAN-to-LAN or dial-in VPNs, or up to 16 SSL or Open VPN tunnels. Hardware acceleration, 60,000 NAT sessions, a powerful object-based firewall, up to 16 VLANs and 8 LAN subnets, App QoS so you can prioritise different apps with a single click, and a whole lot more. I'll leave a link to the product page below so you can check out the full range of features and performance advantages. The Vigor2866AC has all of the same features, but also includes 802.11ac Wi-Fi, which features 2x2 MIMO and offers up to 400 megabits per second on the 2.4 gigahertz band and up to 867 megabits per second on the 5 gigahertz band. It also features the latest WPA3 wireless encryption method, wireless WAN, Wi-Fi mesh capability, and a hotspot web portal if you'd like to offer Wi-Fi to guests or customers. Around the back, you'll find an on-off switch and antennas. Those antennas are removable and are an SMA type connector, which allows higher gain antennas to be fitted if you want to extend the range. DrayTek have the ANT1205 and ANT1207 available, or the directional ANT2520. The Vigor2866V AC is the same, but also has a built-in analog telephone adapter for VoIP. You can connect up to 2 analog telephones into these ports to make VoIP calls, or connect a cordless base station with multiple handsets if you like. You can also connect those ports to an analog PABX system, just like standard PSTN lines, which is great for a small office to add a couple of VoIP lines to an existing phone system. The Vigor2866AX model features the latest 802.11ax Wi-Fi standard, which offers distinct advantages in high-density Wi-Fi deployments. That includes OFDMA, which splits a single frame into groups of subcarriers, allowing multiple users to transmit simultaneously. Another feature in 802.11ax is BSS colouring. Normally, APs have to take turns to transmit if using the same radio channel, so that the data doesn't get mixed up. BSS colouring means that data from each source can be individually identified so that APs can now transmit at the same time on the same radio channel without having to wait their turn. 2 other models are featured which have built-in SIM slots to connect to 3G or 4G LTE connections. That's the same wireless network that mobile phones use to surf the internet. You can actually fit 2 SIMs into these, with the second one coming into play if the first one isn't working. The primary one goes in the bottom slot, and the top slot will be the backup connection. The first of those models is the Vigor2866L. Now, this model doesn't have Wi-Fi to create a wireless LAN. Those antennas you see are for the 3G, 4G LTE connection. You might also notice 1 USB port instead of 2 on the front. The second USB port is sacrificed for the LTE modem inside. The second model is the Vigor2866LAC. This one does have Wi-Fi, and it's the same 802.11ac Wi-Fi standard as the Vigor2866AC model. Okay, so that is DrayTek's Vigor2866 series router range, which come with a 2-year back-to-base warranty.
Okay, can everyone see my slides there and hear me?
Loud and clear.
No worries. All right, let's just wait a second for everyone to come back online, but it looks pretty good there from what I can see. Now, did you want to talk now, Richard, or wait to the end?
I'll let you do your thing, Darren. I'll just say my thing at the end. All I want to do at the end, perhaps, is just introduce that promotion and remind everybody about the survey form.
Too easy.
Too easy. All right, cheers.
No worries. All right, so welcome back everyone. In the second part of today's workshop, we'll continue on from part one, starting with a brief look at DrayTek's software-based management options, which Java mentioned briefly. Then we'll look at some diagnostic functions and finish up with a brief look at some troubleshooting tips. Okay, software-based management. There's two software-based management systems that DrayTek have available to manage DrayTek devices. Those are VigorACS and VigorConnect. We'll start off with a look at VigorACS. VigorACS 3 is the latest version of DrayTek's network management system, and it's also the core of the DrayTek SD-WAN solution that allows it to perform some application optimization and monitoring. ACS incidentally stands for Automatic Configuration Server. New features include SD-WAN as mentioned, VoIP MOS and SLA, application visibility and SD-WAN policy, and client management with captive portal. It uses TR069, which allows system integrators and network administrators to configure, monitor, and manage DrayTek devices remotely from the comfort of their offices or homes. You can have any number of DrayTek devices on the internet that can be managed by ACS3, and licensing is available from 25 nodes. It has a user-friendly interface and a responsive display which automatically adjusts and arranges content to suit a variety of screens, including PCs, tablets, and phones. It allows automating and scheduling regular maintenance tasks like firmware updates and configuration backups, and you can also run real-time reports from 6 different types of reports. So you can always see what's happening in the networks that you manage, and you can make configuration changes without having to go on site. What's TR069? TR069 is an application layer protocol for remote management of end user devices. It was developed for automatic configuration of modems and routers and gateways, access points, and so on by using an auto configuration server, ACS. Bear in mind that this communication isn't constantly on. The device establishes the connection with the ACS3 server only at specific points in time determined by the periodic inform interval. It usually lasts for several seconds, exchanging all necessary messages between the device and the ACS3 server, and this short exchange of messages is called a provisioning session. You can reduce the periodic inform interval if you don't want to wait around for a provisioning session to update your changes. However, we don't recommend doing that or leaving it like that because it can place additional load on the server, so we recommend only doing it for testing purposes. Once logged into ACS3, you'll be presented with the dashboard page. This gives you a listing of all your sites and devices, as well as a map showing their locations. And from there, you can check on each network and make changes as needed. Okay, we won't go into more detail than that for now, but if you're interested, there's a heap more information available in a number of videos on our YouTube channel covering the topics listed here. These are also on page 55 in the workshop manual. You'll notice down the corner of the slides, there's these little references to the manual. So if you want to make a note to follow up on something again later, you can jot it down there. We also recently produced a series of webinars, which you'll find on our YouTube channel as well, that go into details about ACS3's features. Okay, the other software-based management system that DrayTek have available is VigorConnect. This one's free and can be downloaded from our website. It has many similar features to VigorACS3, but it's only for APs and switches on a local network. It can manage up to 100 DrayTek access points or switches, but they have to be on the same LAN, so it's suitable for businesses with multiple DrayTek APs and switches located within a building on the same local area network who don't require the advanced functionality of ACS3. Did I mention that it's free? As with VigorACS, VigorConnect also utilises the TR069 standard for communication between the VigorConnect server and the CPE devices. VigorConnect includes device discovery that will automatically discover DrayTek Vigor access points on the local area network and auto configure the TR069 settings. You basically set everything up in VigorConnect and it pushes the configuration to the APs, which is much quicker and easier than configuring each device one by one. However, for this to happen, the access points have to be at their factory default settings when connected to the network. The dashboard view provides comprehensive details of device status, so you can see AP online, offline status, SSIDs, channels, and clients. You can select an AP to drill down into more details for it and see information about its current usage and configuration all in one place. The monitoring feature will notify you when an access point loses connectivity or when rogue access points are nearby. You can also see CPU and memory usage. Does everyone know what a rogue access point is? They're basically access points that appear on a network, but they shouldn't be there. An employee might have installed one to get free internet access for a personal device, or a hacker might have done it in order to gain access to the network to steal information or conduct a man-in-the-middle or denial of service attack, amongst other things. I remember one instance with a site I was on a few years ago. We had an access point that we just couldn't locate. No one knew where it was. And eventually we figured out that the server room had been remodeled at some point, and there's a false wall installed, and it was on the other side of that. Okay, that's it for DrayTek software-based management systems. Let's now go on to the diagnostic functions available in DrayTek routers, which can help to troubleshoot common issues. Most of these are found in the diagnostics menu in the router. Some of the options I'll go through might not be available in older model routers or older firmware versions. Also, some other diagnostic functions, such as obtaining debug logs, are available via the CLI in the router using Telnet. All right, the first one in the menu is dial out triggering. This shows the packet header that is transmitted when a WAN connection, like a PPPoE connection, is initiated. Both hex format and the decoded format are displayed. This is mainly for information purposes these days and is unlikely to have any real relevance because most routers are always on and connected now. Next in the menu, we have the routing table. This is an important tool to troubleshoot routing issues. It displays IPv4 and IPv6 routes, which are built from direct connections, static routing, dynamic routing, policy-based routing, and inter-VLAN routing. In the routing table, we have three main components, which are the destination IP and its subnet mask, the gateway IP address, and the interface used in the last column. The symbol in the first column there shows the type of route used. Under the image there, we have what those letters all stand for. So we have a C for connected, S means it's a static route, R means it's a route learned using RIP, that's a routing information protocol. Asterisk means it's the default route, and the little tilde symbol, that's the little wavy line one, means it's a private route. You'll find this on page 61 in the manual if you want to refer back to it later. The first entry in the routing table in the red box there is the default route, which is indicated by 0.0.0.0/0.0.0.0. When a workstation needs to send data to a destination host or network, the router is usually involved in making the communication possible. However, if the router can't find the destination network in its routing table, the destination will be unreachable. To prevent that happening, a default route is configured in the router to send all data packets for unknown destination networks to the interface corresponding to the default route setting. In this example here, the default route is directed to WAN 1, which is our internet connection at 168.95.98.254. Next up in the menu is the ARP cache table. This lists all devices connected to the router and shows the IP address used and the corresponding MAC address. The ARP cache can be used when troubleshooting network issues such as IP address conflicts, because it'll show the MAC address of the device using that IP address, and it can also verify that devices are in the correct LAN. Got the little interface column over on the right there. It shows what LAN it's connected to. Okay, next up is the IPv6 neighbor table. This one displays the mapping between Ethernet hardware addresses, that's their MAC addresses, and IPv6 addresses. This one is useful in diagnosing IPv6 address conflicts and other IPv6 network problems. The DHCP table displays the assigned IP addresses for devices connected to the router. This one's really useful for diagnosing network problems. I can get, using this, you can see a list of all devices on your network, their IP address, MAC addresses, and so on. That's if they're using DHCP. Network address translation, NAT, is a mechanism where one or more private IP addresses can share a single public IP address. The most recent 128 NAT entries are stored in the NAT session table. It shows the source and destination IP addresses and ports used, as well as the WAN interface. You can use this one to troubleshoot port redirection or open port issues when port forwarding isn't working as expected. How it works is the router sets up a pseudo port in the NAT session table, which is a temporary port used for NAT to keep track of the sessions. And here we have an example of a NAT session where port redirection is used. Here, incoming internet sessions are forwarded to the relevant PCs based on port numbers. So in this example, we have anything on port 85 here being directed to 192.168.1.10. Port 86 is going to 1.11, port 87 is going to 1.12, and port 88 is going to 1.13. The information from these sessions will be displayed in the NAT session table. Next up, in the diagnostics menu, we have the DNS cache table. DrayTek routers can function as DNS servers, which allows LAN clients to look up DNS information by sending DNS requests to the router. This DNS information is temporarily cached in the router and can be viewed here. This diagram illustrates how local private IP addresses can be mapped to a domain name to be used on the local network. It's this information that is held temporarily in the DNS cache table. Next one, ping diagnosis, which a lot of us, I assume, will be familiar with. This one's a handy tool to test connectivity to a host on the internet by entering either its IP address or its domain name. The router will then send ping packets to the remote host. It'll measure the round trip time to give you an indication of the speed and quality of the connection, or the speed and quality of the other end. Poor quality connection may have a large number of drop packets, resulting in timeout results. Also, if you ping the domain name, you can check that DNS resolution is working in the router. If that doesn't work, but pinging the IP address does, you'll know you have a DNS problem. I'm on TPG. We had one last year. Suddenly the internet seemed to be offline, but everything looked fine. And then I figured out that their DNS servers were down, and manually configuring Google DNS got around it until they fixed the problem. Okay, so if neither domain name or the IP address works, then you'll know your internet connection has a problem, or the remote host is probably down. There's a built-in speed test in the works for the DrayTek GUI. I think it would be super useful. We can put that in the wish list. I haven't heard of any plans for that to be implemented into the firmware as such. Thanks, Neil. Okay, the data flow monitor can be used to check the real-time bandwidth usage for devices on the LAN. The number of sessions being used at a given time is also displayed. This feature can be used to troubleshoot high bandwidth usage by LAN clients. So if you've got a torrent leecher on your network, this will pick them up. Also displayed is the current and peak data flow for each WAN connection. The page is periodically refreshed according to the time interval selected, which can be anything from 10 seconds up to 1800 seconds, which is 30 minutes. So it can't be used for long-term recording or monitoring of traffic flow through the router. Yeah, so if you've got a mad leecher on your network, you can also block them over here. The data flow monitor can also be used to verify settings configured in bandwidth management, and bandwidth and session limits are working as expected. Oh yeah, back to the block. So when the data flow monitor, there's an action item called block over here, or unblock, because this one's already blocked. So that allows blocking for a particular device for troubleshooting. So if you click on that, it'll block it for 5 minutes, but you can unblock it manually before 5 minutes if you want to. So you can use this to temporarily free up some bandwidth if the WAN connection becomes congested. Traffic graph, it's a handy feature that displays the transmitted and received traffic for each WAN connection over a period of time. It can also be used to check for unusual activity in the router, such as high traffic loads after hours when you expect to see nothing happening. Just keep in mind that it doesn't show traffic for an individual device, but total traffic to the internet. VPN graph is available in higher end routers supporting more than 2 VPN tunnels, such as we have in the 2865 series. It displays the VPN syslog entries for both host to LAN and LAN to LAN connections. There's also a VPN graph tab, which displays VPN traffic over a period of time in graphical format, and that's the one we're looking at there, VPN graph. Traceroute, it's another one we've all probably used at some point. It's a handy network diagnostic tool used to track real-time the pathway taken by data packets to a destination network, where it's pretty much the same as the traceroute command on a PC if you've ever used that. It'll report the IP addresses of all routers it pinged in between. It also records the time taken for each hop the packet makes during its route to the destination. If a remote site is unreachable, traceroute can be used to check if the cause is due to a break in the data path. For the host, you can use either the domain name or the host IP address as you can for ping. Traceroute can also be used if the routing is configured correctly in the router. We have an example on page 75 in the user guide for a typical scenario where we can use traceroute to verify that certain traffic is using the correct WAN connection. You'll find more details about traceroute there as well if you're interested. Okay, time for a quick quiz question. How can you quickly check that routing has been set up correctly to a certain destination? Is it A, check the traffic graph, B, use ping diagnosis, C, use traceroute, D, use the data flow monitor, or E, check the DNS cache? Please type your answer in the chat box. We got a C. Lots of C's coming in. And the answer is yes, C. Use traceroute to check the data path to the destination. You'll find this in the diagnostics menu. As mentioned, you can also do it from a PC using a command prompt and the tracert command. Both should show the same results. In the example shown here on the left, we use the router GUI to perform a traceroute to google.com. And on the right, we use command prompt on a PC to DrayTek.com. Both show the hops on the internet to get to the destination, and both should reveal that the correct path has been configured in the router. Another way you can do traceroute is using telnet and the IP tracert and IP route status commands. Syslog Explorer offers a quick way to review and download the router Syslog. Some low-end routers like the Vigor 130 and Vigor 167 and older model routers might not have this option. Syslogs are used to diagnose various issues. For example, a VPN connection isn't being established or a firewall rule isn't working as expected. The syslogs collected can be filtered by selecting one of the syslogs type, as we have here, syslog type. And that's what we see in that menu when we drop it down. So all will display all syslogs. And if you only want to see WAN or VPN, you can select that. A maximum of 1,000 lines can be displayed. For more extensive syslogs captured over a long period, it's recommended to use the USB syslog, which will save the logs files to an attached USB flash drive. The web syslog can be downloaded using the export function, so it can be sent to DrayTek support for analysis. IPv6 TSPC status page will help to diagnose issues with IPv6 connections that utilize TSP, that's tunnel setup protocol. If TSPC is configured correctly, the router will display the details as shown in this example here. This will be displayed when the router is connected to the tunnel broker successfully. Down the bottom, you see a green connected. Obviously, anything other than that, there's a problem. The DSL status diagnostic page is often used to troubleshoot VDSL issues. It'll show the firmware modem code, upstream and downstream speeds, signal to noise ratio, attenuation, and errors such as CRC, as well as many other error conditions. The information on this page can be sent to DrayTek support along with Syslogs to help find the cause of the VDSL connection issue. Sometimes the cause could be noisy phone lines or the modem code used not being compatible with the NBN connection. Usually, using an incompatible modem code results in unstable VDSL connection or sometimes a complete failure to connect. Some parameters, such as the SNR margin, can be tweaked by using telnet commands. And I'll just close that tab. High availability status page displays the status of all routers belonging to the same DARP group. That's DrayTek Address Resolution Protocol. The diagram here shows high availability using hot standby mode. That's where two routers share a common WAN source. One router is the primary and the other is the secondary for redundancy. The secondary router is always synchronized to the primary router so that if the primary router fails, the secondary router will take over and become the primary device using the same WAN to connect to the internet. In the authentication information page, we can see which users have been authenticated using Radius or 802.1x. There's two tabs on this page, the first being the authentication user list. That displays details of users who have been authenticated. The other one is the authentication information log, which, true to its name, displays the complete authentication log information. The DOS flood table is a handy feature to readily identify potentially malicious network traffic. For this to work, it needs the firewall feature defense setup to be configured and the threshold set, which you can see in the screenshot down on the bottom right there. Once it's set up, any DOS attacks detected will be reported in the DOS flood table. And that looks like this. The identified IP addresses and destination ports used in SYN, UDP, and ICMP flood attacks will be shown on the respective tabs up the top here. That red X icon next to an IP address means that a DOS event was detected at that address. And then you can block these IP addresses by simply clicking on the block button beside each one. And the final item we'll look at is route policy diagnostics. It's linked to the load balance route policy settings in the router. It's a handy diagnostic feature to verify that routing policies are working as expected and to troubleshoot routing issues within the router. There's two modes that can be used. These are analyze a single packet and analyze multiple packets using an input file. Currently producing two videos about routing if you want more information about routing and how to use this route policy diagnosis tool. That's on our YouTube channel at the moment. The other part 2 should be going up in a couple of weeks or so. So in the example shown here, we can use the route policy diagnosis to verify that the settings are configured correctly. For a single packet, you just need to specify the source and destination IP addresses, and the result will be displayed at the bottom, showing which rule matches the entered criteria. So down the bottom here, we see we've got two matches. One is the default route, which has a priority of 250, and the other one is a route policy 1, which has a priority of 200, which is higher. So this one gets preference, so it goes via that route. Okay, moving on to the final topic, which is troubleshooting methods to resolve common issues. Troubleshooting can often require a combination of using the system maintenance and diagnostic functions, as well as telnet to obtain certain syslogs. We'll start off with Harvey taking us through a hands-on demo on the different ways to capture the router syslog. This is often required when troubleshooting various issues that you might come across. Detailed instructions are available on pages 103 to 110 and 123 if you'd like to follow along. Okay, over to you, Harvey.
Thank you. Let me switch over. Okay, now I'm going to demonstrate a few methods of how to capture a syslog, which, as the name implies, is just a log generated by the system whenever there's an event happening. It can be very useful if we have to diagnose issues such as WAN not being authenticated, VPN issues, and so on and so forth. So I've recorded a small video for you, and then let's go through it.
So we have 4 ways to capture syslog on a DrayTek router. First, we can use this DrayTek Syslog utility tool. Secondly, we can save syslog to an attached USB disk. Third, we can use Syslog Explorer in the diagnostic tabs. And fourth, we can use some telnet commands in certain special circumstances. We will now start with the Syslog utility tool. We now have a 2927 and we go to the System Maintenance Syslog tab. We enable Syslog, select the Syslog server and then type in the Syslog server IP address. Where do we get this address? We just use the PC connected to the router as the Syslog server and we do an IP config to get the correct IP address. Here it is shown to be 192.168.1.10, which we enter as a server IP address here. We can also put a filter on the syslog capture, such as firewall, VPN, user access, WAN info, DSL, and wireless LAN info. This is to filter out on the info instead of getting a clogged syslog with unnecessary details. Then we go to the DrayTek website to download the Syslog utility. We then run the exe file and here it is ready to capture the syslog. Sometimes you need to check the PC firewall to make sure it isn't blocking the data capture. And here you can see the syslog being captured.
You can now see the firewall, VPN, user access, connection, interface, IPv6, and wireless tabs. And some of them, like the interface tab, has additional tabs, such as the WAN, LAN, and DSL debug logs. You can also show the traffic graphs. Now I will show you how to save the current syslog capture to a file. You click on the Save tab and you have a selection of Save to a file or Record log to a file in real time, or even record log to multiple files. You just give the file a name and click OK. Then you can open the file in the download folder. Here is the Save Syslog file. This concludes our first method of capturing a syslog. Now we move on to the second method of saving the syslog to an attached USB disk. You just connect your USB stick to a USB port and then, as usual, check the time and date of the router. And then click on the Syslog tab. Enable the Syslog. Tick the USB disk. Note here that the USB disk needs to be FAT formatted and be not more than 16 gig. You should also select to overwrite the oldest log. Here we selected 8 gigabytes. And as usual, select which filter you would like to apply, such as firewall, VPN, user access, WAN, DSL, etc. And you can then fetch the saved syslog in the File Explorer in the USB application folder. You just click on the log file and it will be saved in the Downloads folder. Here is the syslog collected. This concludes the second method of collecting syslog on a USB disk. Our third method of collecting syslog is to use the Syslog Explorer feature, the Diagnostic tab. As usual, we will check the date and time that will reflect in the syslog. Then we go to the Syslog Explorer tab.
and enable Web Syslog. Then select Syslog type. This is where the filters are selected one at a time or all of them. And we will select the display mode as always record the new event. You can then export the captured log and display it from the downloads folder. The main disadvantage of using this method is the limited amount of data that can be collected, but it can be useful in certain circumstances. Now we move on to the fourth method of collecting syslog, which uses Telnet command lines. However, this method is used only under DrayTek head office supervision, as it requires a special firmware that contains a script which will raise a log event in case of error. This log collection may be run for hours and would take a huge amount of data to be collected. Hence, the script will filter out events not related to the issue being monitored. So we now move to the Telnet part of the demo. We open a command prompt, and after having changed the directory to the C local data folder, we start the Telnet mode by typing telnet, and then type setlog file capture.txt, which will be the name of the captured syslog text file. And we type open 192.168.1.1 to connect to the router. You will then be prompted for the admin username and password. And finally, we launch the log capture mode by typing syscontotel enable. From this screen, you can start debug mode by tapping Ctrl S, and this will start the log capture, and to exit by pressing the space bar. Here you can see a typical log, and note there is no event shown except for a system memory status. Remember, you need a special modified firmware to do this syslog capture. We can then go to the local data folder and open the capture.txt file, which you can see here. This concludes the demo on the 4 types of syslog capture available for DrayTek routers. Thank you.
All right. So if you have any questions, or else I hand you back to Java or Darren.
Hey, no worries, I'll just share my screen again. Thanks, Harvey. You'll also find that video on our YouTube channel. Just go there and go to the videos tab and search Syslog to find it. Okay. So back to troubleshooting. The first one we'll look at is unexpected router reboots. Routers usually restart to correct an error condition detected. To check if the router has restarted, just go to the online status physical connection menu or the dashboard in the router and take a look at the system uptime. If that's only a short amount of time, you'll know that the router has restarted just recently. There's 4 main reasons a router might restart. The first one is that the router reboot happened due to a scheduled maintenance task, such as firmware update being done, configuration change that required a reboot to save the settings, or someone just manually rebooted it. Another one is when a faulty USB device is attached to the router, which puts the port into an error state and causes the router to crash. The third reason is a faulty power adapter, which provides reduced power, makes the router unstable. And the fourth reason could be a firmware bug. To check if the crash occurred due to a firmware bug, go to the router CLI using Telnet or the web console, then run the command sysverdbg. The system displayed here is the system information, including the firmware version. That's in this section here. If the crash occurred due to a firmware bug, you'll see the line firmware exception debug info. And below that, you'll see which CPU registers were used and the processes that were running before the router crashed. You can save a copy of the output and forward it to us so that we can send it to DrayTek R&D for analysis and fix via an updated firmware version. To clear the debug log, run the command sysver dbg reset. If the debug log is empty after a router crash, that is, if there's nothing comes up down here, you'll indicate that the reboot was due to other causes such as a planned reboot or a configuration change or a loss of power. Loader model routers and firmware have an option to send the debug log via mail alert, which you can see on the right there. You've got all those options there. You can get sent via email alert. In the Vigor 3910 and 2926, here the debug logs are available for download. The next troubleshooting tip is what to do when you forget the router admin password. This can sometimes happen when a network administrator leaves an organization and doesn't pass the information on to the new administrator. If you're lucky, you might have a configuration backup. However, since the configuration file is encrypted, it's impossible to recover the admin password from the file. Luckily, there's two ways to recover it. One way is to restore the backup configuration file without a password. I'll explain more about that one shortly. The other method is to reset it through using VigorACS 2 or ACS 3. If all else fails and you don't have a configuration backup, the last resort is to reset the device to factory default settings by pressing the factory reset button for at least 5 seconds, then reconfigure it manually. Hopefully you'll at least have some documentation on what settings were used to help you set it all up again. To use the configuration restore method, you'll need to first reset the router to factory defaults, then go to the System Maintenance Configuration Backup menu in the router, browse to the location of the backup file, and then select Restore Configuration, accept the login password. Once the router reboots, you can log in using the default username and password admin, and all the other settings will be restored. For this method to work, the configuration file has to be the one created from the same device. The next method to reset the admin password in a DrayTek device is to use VigorACS. For this method to work, the device must already be managed by ACS. There's 3 options you can use here. These are reset the password using the maintenance option, reconfigure the password by device configuration, and reconfigure the password by the TR069 parameter. Full details available in the training manual on pages 91 to 93 and also in that knowledge base article there, which Roy has just, or will put in the chat box there for us in a sec. Damaged firmware is a common issue which can arise after attempting to upgrade the router firmware. This is usually caused by the firewall and the PC used to perform the upgrade blocking the firmware file transfer. When this occurs, the router will come up with a firmware damage message similar to that one shown here. Warning, firmware damage, you must upgrade firmware immediately or the router will die after reboot. Sounds dire. So when the router is in this state, restarting the router will usually cause it to become unresponsive. The solution here is to first disable the PC firewall and then use the firmware upgrade utility to install the firmware. Yeah, that's if upgrading through the Web GUI doesn't work. You can refer to section 4.1 in the training manual for full details, or have a look at that video that Sam took us through there before. If the router does become unresponsive, you'll usually see 2 or 3 LEDs flashing in unison on the front panel of the router, or in some cases, all LEDs are hard on. Power cycling usually doesn't fix it. Routers this happens to, as Sam mentioned, are sometimes called bricked, because that's essentially what they're good for in this state, or doorstops or paperweights. Thankfully, DrayTek has a recovery procedure which usually gets it going again. Yeah, Sam took us through this procedure, as did Java, so I'll just do a quick recap. You'll first need to put the router into TFTP mode. That involves first switching off the router, then switch it on again while pressing the factory reset button. When in TFTP mode, the router will default to 192.168.1.1 and the password will be admin. The computer will also need to be connected to the router LAN port, and you'll need to configure the PC with a static IP address in the same subnet, so 192.168.1.something, just not 1.1. Once the LEDs start flashing, release the reset button and use the firmware upgrade utility to install the firmware. You've got about 30 seconds to start installing the firmware before it times out, but if that happens, you just need to start over and go through the process again. If you need to refer back to this, you'll find it in the manual on page 96. We'll just search our knowledge base or YouTube channel. Debugging VoIP issues. DrayTek have a number of router models with built-in VoIP services like the Vigor2865 VAC and the Vigor2765 VAC. Some typical VoIP issues that can arise are failing to register with a SIP service provider, call dropouts, one-way communication, and completely unable to make or receive calls. This is a large topic, so today I'll just give an overview of what is involved in troubleshooting. There's more information in the knowledge base article down the bottom there, which we'll probably link to as well in the chat box if you're interested. Also, the workshop manual on page 97. Okay, so it helps to understand the SIP registration process when analysing VoIP debug logs to troubleshoot issues. There's two types of SIP registration processes shown here. And you'll see this information in the VoIP logs. To capture VoIP debug logs, you'll need to go to the router CLI and run the command VoIP debug show MSG, show message up the top there. There it is there. It's recommended to first flush the debug log to make it easier to see the logs for the current call you're monitoring. To do this, first run the command VoIP debug flush. If SIP registration is successful, you should see the message SIP/2.0 OK. That's in the red box there. If the debug logs don't find the cause, then the next step is to capture the data packets using Wireshark. Instructions on how to do this are in knowledge base articles 5366 and 5735, which is in the chat box now. Both the debug logs and Wireshark data capture can be sent to DrayTek support for analysis to find the cause of the issue. And the final troubleshooting topic we'll look at today is being unable to log into the router. There's a number of tips listed in the workbook starting from page 101. These are: check the physical connection. If it's not plugged in, obviously you're not going to be able to access the router. Check the router IP address. Clear the ARP cache on the computer and specify the HTTP port. To check the current HTTP port setting, you can go to the router CLI and run the command mngt http port space question mark. There it's there. And this one, the result is port is 8080. Some settings might also be restricting access to the router. This includes the DHCP server is disabled, in which case setting a static IP on your PC in the same subnet can be a workaround. You can usually guess that it's going to be 192.168.1.1. If not, reset the router. There's a strict bind IP to MAC in place. Your LAN interface might be disabled. There's LAN access control enabled. There's VLAN tag enabled. And the WAN is bridged using multi-PVC/VLAN. And finally, check the LED status on the front of the router. It might indicate damaged firmware, and you'll need to follow the steps we discussed previously to recover it. Okay, so in this second session, we started by looking at software-based management platforms, followed by a look at the diagnostic functions in the menu. We then had a demo by Harvey on the different ways you can capture router syslogs, and which led us into some tips to troubleshoot typical issues you might come across. Okay, we now have 15 minutes or so if you'd like to ask any questions. If you can't hang around, please fill out our survey to let us know how we went. Let us know what you liked or what you think needs work. Roy will add a link to that in the chat box as well. And there it is. And filling that out will also qualify you for New Zealand $105 off the reseller price. That's ex-GST for a 2866, 2865AX, 2765AX, 2927AX, and a Vigor 21 or a Vigor 2135AX. That's limited to 1 unit per participant and valid to the 15th of May. Thanks everyone for coming along today. We hope it was helpful in developing your knowledge of our DrayTek management and monitoring options. Okay, over to someone who's trying to talk.
Maybe Richard.
Quick word from Richard.
Over to Richard. Yep, no worries.
Hi guys. Sorry I couldn't make it earlier. Technical difficulties kept me out. Just wanted to thank the DrayTek guys. You do a great job every time. I know it takes a lot of effort in the background to get these workshops off the ground. So thank you, well done. We've been working together with the team in Australia for the best part of 2 decades now, and we really enjoy working with them and what they do for us. DrayTek's one of our longest standing brands. All the retailers who have joined, I hope that you gain some good information and you've got some confidence on how the DrayTek appliances are monitored and managed now. Good to see so many people making a commitment to doing training and improving their knowledge. As Darren said, there is a survey form to fill out. Anybody who's filled out that survey form will get access to the promotion that he mentioned. I'll email the details of that one to everybody so you know which models are included straight after this this workshop is finished. So again, once more, thank you to all the DrayTek Australia guys, well done, and thanks to all of the resellers who have joined us today. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
So,
Thanks, Richard.
Are we waiting on some more questions, or is everybody?
Yeah, floor's open. Thank you for the final words, Richard. Love the t-shirt.
We must go shopping in the same store, hey?
Apparently. If there are no questions, we'll conclude the session. Any questions at all, please feel free to email us directly at support@draytek.com.au or reach out to the friendly team at SnapperNet. Let's wrap it up for now.
Good stuff. Thank you, Jawa. Thank you, all the DrayTek guys. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Until next time, hopefully we see you again in one of our online workshops. Take care.
Very good. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye bye.